Welcome to the second video of the greatest economics YouTube channel of all time, Saronomics. Now, as promised in the last video, I will be going over liquidity preference. So first, what is liquidity? Liquidity is the ability to convert assets into cash quickly and without losing value. Guys, this is very important to note about liquidity. Cash is the most liquid asset because you can use it immediately. Note that Ben Franklin is wearing a scuba mask because he's so liquid. Anyway, liquidity and banks, or in other words, liquidity as it relates to the Federal Reserve. So in terms of banks, liquidity is a measure of the cash and other assets banks have available to quickly pay bills and meet short-term business and financial obligations. Now, with that definition in mind, let's do some trivia. Will the Fed increase or decrease the discount rate to provide more liquidity to the financial system? So going to help you out, in case you forgot, that is the definition of the discount rate. So with all this information, take a couple seconds, pause the video, and come back when you think you have your answer. Alright, now that you have your answer, if you said increase, you're wrong. But if you said decrease, you're correct. Now let's go over why reducing the discount rate increases liquidity. So number one, it makes it cheaper for banks to borrow from the central bank. Therefore, banks lend out more money to consumers. Therefore, there's more money in the economy and it's easier to access funds. So let's move on from there. Let's compare the money market and the liquidity preference graph. So this is a graph of the money market, courtesy of reviewecon.com. And this is a graph of the liquidity preference model. You may notice they look exactly the same. And yes, that is on purpose. They actually represent the same thing because the money market, or the demand of money, is just a representation of liquidity preference. So let's go a little more in depth of the liquidity preference model. It was surmised by John Maynard Keynes in his 1936 book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. So I actually did some digging. I found a little quote, rather not so little, that describes liquidity preference. Now, let's just read the red. You can read the whole thing on your own. I'm not going to do that right now. So Keynes says it's where an individual's liquidity preference is given by a schedule of the amounts of his resources valued in terms of money or of wage units. Now let's keep that in mind. I'm going to read a second quote. The rate of interest is in itself nothing more than the inverse proportion between a sum of money and what can be obtained for parting with control over the money in exchange for a debt for a stated period of time. Now, let's compare these two quotes and see how it pertains to the money market graph. So we can see the inverse proportion, and we can see a schedule of the amounts of resources.